hello. As we are now preparing the technical details for our presentation, I will use this couple of minutes to thank again to His Excellency Dr. Christian Schönenberger, the Swiss ambassador in Ukraine, and of course to CANactions. And I don't want to say any name because I see this beautiful situation of having dozens and dozens of students, of activists, taking so much responsibility organizing this. So I would say again my compliments to CANactions and also the choice of this. I said it already today, to choose this space as a sort of as a temporary intervention here to reactivate this kind of industrial hall. And we know that not only in Eastern Europe but also Western Europe about this age of knowledge, this post-industrial age, how it's important to find alternative ideas, relevant ideas to rethink also our industrial heritage we have in our cities. Just a few words about me, and Mateusz made me also to rethink about my own identity. I'm born in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was back then Yugoslavia. I studied in Berlin. I also worked in a small office in Denmark, did my internship. Spent a half year in Milan at the Polytechnico doing research. And now I'm, since end of 2011, I work for Urban Think Tank, which is also started as a bottom-up initiative in Caracas, Venezuela, in South America. In 1993, organized and initiated by two persons. So again, very international. One is Austrian, and one is born in New York, but with a Venezuelan heritage, Alfredo Willenburg and Hubert Klumpner. And they started also as a bottom-up initiative in South America, starting organizing workshops, doing projects in communities. I'm going to show some of the earlier projects as well. And later they moved to Columbia University in New York, to the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. And then since 2010, Urban Think Tank has a professorship also at the ETH in Zurich, which is the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, the public institution at the architecture department. So, we all know, everyone nowadays is talking about cities, so not only architects. And you hear everywhere, first time, I think it was 2007, where there was this, for the first time people started saying that now more than 50% of the world's population live in cities. So everyone knows that. Everyone also knows that cities use 70% of the electricity, of energy. And then cities also, we have always to take those figures with a bit of reservation, but let's assume it's true that the cities produce 80% of the CO2, responsible for 80% of the CO2 emission, etc., etc. So in a way, cities are the problem, but maybe also the solution. Cities are also the seats, the headquarters of power, of institutions, of governments, etc., etc. So just as Urban Think Tank is based as much of its project in something that is called the Global South. So this is actually what I was talking about. Our planet used to be a blue planet, now it's an urban planet. And we have those mega cities, and everyone talks of mega cities, cities that have more than 10 million people, secondary cities, 3 to 5 million people, etc., etc. So those are just, again, dramatic, shocking figures of what's going on, how cities are growing, and mostly in the Global South. And when I was a student, and I heard about this figure in India that until, I think it was 2008, and then until 2030, there was a prediction that 180 million people are going to move to cities only in India, which means this means like they have to construct 12 new Mumbais. Mumbai is a mega city of no one knows how many people live. And that gives you, or they have to, 180 million people means Indians have to construct more than 100 Viennas or Munich. So just to give you just a comparison about these dramatic numbers. But even though this graphic is very poor, what we tried to say in Urban Think Tank that looking at this, and I show it on purpose, this sort of kind of vague, blurry graphic of what a city really is in architecture, and urbanism, and politics, economy, social, environment. Mateusz showed this graphic of how many aspects we have to think of if we plan cities and build architecture, plan landscapes, etc., etc. But what we forget as a profession, and it's from my point of view as a young professional, that when I was studying, let's say the people very often were not so much considered as an important factor, even though we should be building and planning for people. And talking about India, this is just a collage of images from the Howrah Bridge in Kolkata in West Bengal in India. So this shows you just this astonishing quantity of people who we have to deal with that. And zooming away now we are in Switzerland, in Zurich, which is according to rankings the most or second most livable city in Europe. So how is it also, is it possible just also to export our knowledge we let's say produce in Europe, but also how is it, how to bring this knowledge we find in India, in South America, to bring it back to Europe, to Switzerland. I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation how we try to sort of do this comparative study of different case studies we call urban tools. So this is our campus. It's called Science City in Zurich, on top of a hill. So this is just to give you an impression where we are based. Just jumping back and forth now, we are again in Caracas, in Venezuela, in South America, where this is our work, and I'm going to explain this project, which was exhibited. This was just shown in some of the different magazines of, let's say, looking at alternative infrastructures. What I mean by that is, looking at Caracas, which is a city that 60% of all inhabitants, all people, live in informal settlements. So I don't want to give the definition what is an informal settlement, what is a slum, what is a barrio, what is an illegal settlement. But this basically, what you have here is this flat part of the city, which is formal, and you have these steep slopes of very, very dense housing where this kind of informal settlements are placed. Zooming in, this is how this looks like, so much more dramatic urban problems we have in Europe. And it's important to say that, or unfortunately important to say that in this case, this is a barrio called San Agustin, there are the people who have to climb this slope to get to the house. There's no road. And so you have the staircases, which during the rain, they turn into chaos, catastrophe. And the government they had this idea to finally build one road. So this sort of road that climbs the hill, and of course the community was really happy about it. Finally they're getting a road. But then they were not so happy when they realized that approximately 20-25% of all the houses have to leave, have to be deconstructed, destroyed in order to make space for this road. So, and as a urban think tank, as activists, they kind of proposed alternative idea. You can see it's kind of social design, discussing with people, which is always not so easy. Everyone has his own wishes. So this was this angry woman and angry people who were not so happy about this kind of idea to build a road, but they were looking for, together with us, looking for different solutions. And this is something, we have a very simple diagram, and I'm happy to share it with our, especially with the student audience, of how we try to combine research and design. So translate research findings into design. So first step is just to understand the situation, and it's of course much more complex. And I don't have time to explain everything now. There is something called, our methodology is shown. If you Google it, if you Google informal toolbox urban think tank, then there's a whole PDF of our research and design methodology. But just briefly here, so first step is understand, and there are different aspects we're looking at. Here you can see the graphic. So it's really simple. So understand, interpret what you see, act, and identify. That's the first step. So it goes like this. Then the second step was to understand what's there, of course, and so doing something that we call critical mapping. and this was done together with students from New York, from the Columbia University. If you look at sort of different potentials of this site, look at topography, look at roads, social infrastructure, so you can see all the kind of list of things we are to integrate the landscape, etc., etc. And then the interpretation, or like the design, was to, let's say, to readjust or kind of reinforce the local potential, local resources that are there, and propose something which can sort of be alternative to this road that was supposed to go like that. So the idea, and this was later built, constructed and built, is to have a cable car, metro cable car, which connects the formal part of the city, with the metro line, with the informal part of the city. So it's kind of climbing the hill, which was interesting. For the first time, there's not so much contact between those two groups. So the first time people also get in touch somehow, who live in the different parts of the city. And every of those stations we designed is also figuring as a cultural and sports center. So it's kind of bringing this infrastructure that people need in this case. And again, this is sort of this is the kind of final step, the act in the whole process. Just a few more images to give you an impression of how it looks like. So there are the stations down the hill, and this is now how it looks like when it's constructed here. And it's very important to have, in this case, many people mentioned it, to have industry partners. So we have to look for solutions, even though it sounds, I'm not saying anything new, but working with industry, working with governments, working with different stakeholders, local communities is really important. So in this case, we worked with an Austrian company called Doppelmayr, who have, let's say, a lot of experience in constructing such things. It's on alpine ski resorts, but how to bring this technology to Caracas was a really challenge. And this is just a few images here, how it kind of looks like when it's now constructed and working. Moving on to more recent projects of Urban Think Tank, and just showing one slide per project just to give you an impression. And you can find everything online. So on our website, and there are different videos on YouTube. So just Google Reactivate Athens Urban Think Tank. So this is a recent project that's now still in process. Now we have a draft publication on this, which was to reactivate Athens. So we called it 101 Idea for Athens. And every one of us knows that Athens is going through a tough time due to economic crisis, etc., etc. So we there tried to develop sort of 101 ideas, scenarios, put them into scenarios, but not only designs, but let's say more even including social programs to kind of rethink this very. Who said this morning that politicians say, I think it was that politicians say there's no money, so you can imagine how the situation was when we tried to talk to with people who just lost their houses and etc. etc. So the situation. So this is how our methodology is where we try to translate it into Europe, but you will hear much more about that when the project is finished. Jumping to Cape Town, to South Africa, and here the project was on developing a prototype, a building prototype, a shack for a township, which is something like an underprivileged, unfortunately low life standard community. Again, unfortunately, of mostly black people. So what we did there, together with an NGO called Ikailami, and who actually know the local context better than us, and again, industry partners. In this case, was a Swiss company, Swiss Eternit, to look of how their technology they developed can be used to produce solutions in this case. And that's our exhibition. Whoever is in Zurich, it's exhibited in Lovenbräu Areal at the Eva Presenhuber Gallery. So this is one just to show you. And this project is now going on. Now we are sort of collecting, we have like a donation evening in a few days. We will try to collect funding in order to construct those shacks in this township in Cape Town. It's a little more of a design studio. This is a semester project for our students, so we teach semester projects and courses in the ETH architecture department. So this was a project of rethinking the harbor area in Bangkok, where we went kind of more on the urbanism scale, where we went with students there and tried to sort of look at what's happening with this harbor area that has settled many, let's say, informal communities, but now they've been expelled in order for new marinas and such things, kind of very high cost and high architecture. This is a project, it's a last semester student project. We went with students to Port of Spain and Trinidad and Tobago. And this was a project where we work with the Inter-American Development Bank, which sits in Washington, D.C. And this was using this existing creek, so how you want to call it, like a stream, river, which much of it now it's hidden, it's polluted, and how this stream can function as a catalyst for more sustainable urban development. And this is how also the Inter-American Development we work with is calling their program. It's called Sustainable Emerging Cities. And so they now try to move the shift from these mega cities, from Sao Paulo, Mexico cities, Mumbai, to look at cities who are just now, because they're already big, they're not growing anymore, more or less. But looking at cities which have like 1 or 2 or 3 million people. So this is Trinidad and Tobago, and that's the final discussion we had with our students. There was actually, that's me here, and I look very critical. But to be honest, the student work was really, really interesting. That's the model they built just to simulate their ideas. And jumping to now to Caracas and the project I'm going to explain more into detail. That's our project. We exhibited in the 30th Venice Biennale in 2012, and we won also the main prize, which was a project of research project looking at vertical informal communities. And this is a tower in the center of the city in Caracas, a banking tower, 40 stories tower, that was left in 1993. There was a financial crisis and the construction stopped in the process, in the half. So you have something like a half-finished, huge structure, 40 stories tower that was there standing empty for a couple of years, and then at the end of the 1990s, people started, I showed you Caracas, so there's a huge pressure for housing in Caracas, so people started occupying, squatting this building. And this was, for us, interesting to see how a banking tower's office tower, which never was meant to be nothing like a residential function, how this tower is being kind of reused or rethought by the community themselves. So without us, without architects, without economists. So we were looking at, together, which was very interesting, we were together with a company called Schindler in Switzerland. That's kind of Swiss representation of Schindler elevators, escalators. They were also interested to see, because they produce elevators and escalators, to see how a building functions that doesn't have an elevator and escalator. It's 40-story high. So just a few images how one of the first steps of colonizing this building looked like. So people just came in and lived in tents. The kids are playing around, so without wanting to show these romantic pictures to romanticize this, let's say, tough situation there, but just to give you an impression how it looks like. And in the meanwhile, people started, kind of after the second, third step, people started actually adapting this space and to create something like they call home. So you would never think that actually those something like that turned into something like that. So this was very interesting to see how people really readapt the space. This is again Torre David, but also you have such things that people, this is on the, I think it's the 12th floor, I'm not sure. People started sort of building houses on top of the structure itself. Creating microeconomies, if you want, so people have shops there, kind of organize their own transport. So until the 10th floor, there's a ramp. So you pay some money, and then the people with the little kind of motorbikes, they drive you to the 10th floor. So all the functions are somehow being invented and put in place by people. We, together with our colleagues, Chair of Arno Schlüter, this is a building engineering chair, professorship at the ETH, then started also not giving a proposals, but just to visualize this transformation done by people, but also see whether can we, having a kind of very light scenario-based proposal without telling people you should do this and that, but just to, and this building engineering chair, our colleagues are experts in sustainable buildings. Hey, water is good. I thought that's the black cat thing. So they are experts on sustainable technology, and they try to see how people basically produce the electricity there, where does the water come from, where the air condition doesn't exist. So together with our colleagues, we I don't want to go into details here, but this is just the analysis of the project. And now I have a little movie, it's just 2 minutes, it's a glass. Let's see if this movie is playing. That's just a trailer of our, we documented this research project, we started the video from vertical communities also as a movie, which we now show in different festivals around Europe. And this is the trailer for this movie we produced just So I'll leave you to enjoy the movie while I have some water.
Capullo del instrumental. Nosotros sabemos quién son. ¿Quién eres tú? Ya. Dice que en estos tiempos todos se creen que son perfectos. Señor espejo, mostraré ellos sus defectos. Tú me lo sabes si quieren cambiar el mundo en un tema. Y ni siquiera pueden cambiar sus problemas. ¿Tú quién eres? El que con los que me critica nunca aportas nada. No sabe lo que el hip hop significa. Desde papá el rap fue hecho para hacer paz hasta que después no toque el balandreo, vende más. ¿Tú quién eres? Dime. Tu silencio me hace pensar que eres de los que canta rap para que alguien lo pueda notar. En vez de apoyar y callar. En otros tiempos te hubiese colgado y quemado de más. Dime. Si eres acaso que escucho cancerbero, se hizo 2 rimas sobre nombre ya que me critica, pero yo creo que tú eres de los que veo al extranjero y chupa el cuero. En vez de apoyar los de subieron primero. ¿Quién eres? Te pregunté y no me respondiste. Olvidaste que yo mejoré ya lo que tú descubriste. La antigüedad de nada, sin nada tú hiciste. A mí ya se me está olvidando lo que recién tú aprendiste. Deep down from the brothers around, the real people know that I got sound straight from downtown. Yo con el mix que debería donar a ustedes, a ver si así representa como se debe. Real deep down, when all my brothers around, the real people know that I got sound straight from downtown. Yo con el mix que debería donar a ustedes, a ver si así representa como se debe. Yo con el mix que debería donar a ustedes. Dime si eres el que me hagas a describir, pero sin improvisar como si eso no puede hacer surgir. Dime si eres el que aún no puede admitir que te hacen falta más oyentes que no quieren ser MC. Si tú, ¿quién eres? Dime. El que se ve del movimiento se mera en un elemento, pero no tiene talento. ¿Y tú quién eres? Aquel que lucha por salir los medios, busca fama y nunca tendrá respeto en lo que son serios. A tu criterio, dime si eres el.
So I'm sure that, we are not professional filmmakers, but this was using also as film and movie as a media to kind of communicate our research, our ideas, our strategy to the wider audience. So the easiest thing is to talk just to architects and planners and landscape architects, but also what media, and we are experimenting all the time in developing it further, how to communicate our messages to a sort of external and more wider audience. And here I repeat again, I'm really happy that you, the organizers of CANactions, plan to discuss, exhibit the idea competition results in the public space in the city center. So I think it's a really powerful moment to go and sort of have a critical, maybe sometimes it's painful, but have a critical discussion on our work with the wider audience. But I couldn't help myself now, as we are also starting a bit the research initiatives in Central and Eastern Europe, however you want to define this region. Just to tell you some of my kind of older research I conducted on urban transformations in Sarajevo that happened in the 90s and in the last decade, as Sarajevo was a city part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a socialist country. 1991, Yugoslavia kind of the dissolution of Yugoslavia happened. So with all the republics like Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Slovenia, Montenegro, etc., kind of went their own ways. And it was very interesting as a city which has an Ottoman heritage, which has Austrian-Hungarian heritage, which is very interesting, I think, for the western part of Ukraine. And then at the 45, Sarajevo also became something like a sort of ideal city. And I don't want to sound politically provocative, but this is going to be ideal socialist city of an egalitarian society. So of course you have all those kind of monofunctional building blocks there, and they're kind of floating in a whole, let's say, lake of green areas. So more or less a similar situation in many countries in Central and Eastern cities in Central and Eastern Europe. And what happened in Sarajevo during the war, those are the pictures from 1993, 94, that in this situation of chaos, situation of no resources, of the occupied city, under war, under siege, people needed then to rethink their own neighborhoods, rethink their own space. And I was watching a documentary when they asked children where does milk come from, and little children answered from a Tetra Pak. So we in Sarajevo had to sort of reinvent their local resources, not just by watering bottles, but kind of rediscover local energy sources, local water sources, use these kind of beautiful parks and sport fields as agricultural areas, etc., etc. So people also, Sarajevo is a winter Olympic city, so it's a very cold city. So there was like hundreds of thousands of trees being cut by inhabitants themselves in order to find fuel. So the city without parks. It was a green city, but then people are forced to cut trees. So what you have is this. That's the romantic picture of Sarajevo. That's a map, Olympic map, the facilities, and then you see there's the same picture with this kind of war front lines from the war in the 1990s. So where this, let's say, war front lines during the war and after the war, they become new administrative borders. So what happened here is the city was kind of divided, and for a while, this city here, in this case, it was sort of the new administrative border, new municipality emerged after the end of the war. And this is the front line in the middle of the city. So that's from a friend and colleague, Jim Marshall, who is a Scottish photographer who came to see Sarajevo in 1993. And then he married a Bosnian girl, and she forced him to stay until the end of the war in 1996. But then we were happy that in 1996, he went to, right at the end of the war, to photograph the front lines, and then he went in 2011 to the same spot to take the same pictures. And this is how it looks like today. So it's a kind of normal city, everything looks the same, but there's new administrative borders that are visible. And just a few more images of, and I use his photographs, I'm very happy to use them. They document also this kind of transformation of a socialist city to a post-socialist city where new functions have to be kind of added. Of course, in the form of shopping mall, it's just one kind of one destiny. And the whole transformation of, let's say, how Olympic facilities unfortunately have to be turned into graveyards because people are dying, there's not enough space. And another aspect I was looking at is as identity. So that's a picture of the president of Yugoslavia, Josip Tito, and suddenly how the old political identities become superfluous and new sort of identities emerge. I'm not saying we are looking at the same aspects now in this new research project, but this is all this kind of identity transformation, how to sort of invent a methodology to look what's happening to our cities in Eastern and Central Europe. And that's Skopje in Macedonia, in order to sort of justify this independent country. Macedonia builds this immense, that's the size of a person, immense monuments that remind of Alexander the Great, in order to sort of justify this ancient kind of origin of the Macedonian nation. Of course, again, the socialist book, this is Belgrade, and what happened in Belgrade is, they call it the mushroom house, so you have this housing blocks and people have started building things on top. So this is one of the case studies of Novi Beograd we are looking at in this, the new research project. And of course, what happens where these kind of collective utilities do not function anymore, so the government doesn't take care of all the things anymore, and things happen on an individual basis. So if people put together money to put a new facade or insulation, in this case, these people didn't participate, didn't have money, and then it's kind of left out like this. Here is, of course, also we have such things. This is Belgrade again. This is a Roma settlement. If you zoom in a little bit, the images are not very good, but you see approximately what situation you have here, and this kind of new developments emerging in the background. So you can see it here much better. There's something people call it. It's a very also provocative term, like cardboard cities. And this is how it looked like in 2001. It's close to this highway in Belgrade. This is how things look in 2008. So if you're not, I don't want to again kind of directly compare to the situation in CANactions, but this is this density, and at least the Google images looks pretty similar. And then what you have in 2010, these communities have been expelled in order to make space for such development. So that's exactly the same site. Coming slowly to the end of my presentation, and I'm going to now, this is again one of the initiatives we have now in Central and Eastern Europe. This is a workshop I was teaching in Belgrade recently, just now in April, where we had, it's a city where now there's an idea to bring 3 billion, or like 3,000 millions, billion means something else in English, 3,000 millions euros in order to kind of transform the central part of the Belgrade. And this investment is coming from the Emirates. So there are different, I would say, different forces, different visions, identities, tendencies in our cities. What we tried here is to look at different case studies and to see what happens really in Belgrade. And this new city center is supposed to be here, so that kind of whole transformation city center, kind of 3 billion are put here. But this was a responsibility of our colleagues. What we were interested in is this here. This is a neighborhood called Kaluđerica, and this is something in literature people call the largest informal settlement in Europe, where 60 or 70,000 people live, and this is, if you zoom in, how it looks like. So it's very dense. It does have some public transport, some infrastructure, but many of the houses do not have sewage and electricity, etc., etc. So this is something what's being referred when we read about it, and I knew some people from there. This is kind of largest informal settlement in Europe. So we went with students from different cities. We have like a regional workshop, so students from Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia. We went there to look really what's also using again this urban thinking methodology of 4 steps. I talked too much. I used all the battery. Hello? Yes, that's a much better one. We looked at, and which it's not so popular to read urban policies. This is in the Serbian language. It's a detailed urban plan of the residential area projects. And we looked at, and I don't know if you can read and understand that the languages are pretty similar, but this was like a final statement of the authority there that you can't do anything with this. It's just a terrible neighborhood. And this is from 1987, this document. This is it's very romantic. I don't know if you understand, but just say the social meeting places are not there. No infrastructure, no places for sort of passive recreation, relaxation, etc., etc. But we try to really kind of go beyond that and look whether this area is problematic, but what are the potentials. So looking at who lives in urban policies, looking at who lives actually there. So we realized that many war migrants. So from we had like all different waves of migrants coming to this neighborhood, from the Croatian War, Kosovo War. So this whole area is then kind of very mixed. It's also kind of Balkan paradox if you want, but this was important to know what's there. And now we're preparing also the publication. This is just a draft, and it's not sharp, so you can see much here, but this is kind of based on the urban dicta methodology, the research we conducted, the interpretation. There were also some kind of ideas what to do with this, but I don't want to go so much into details here. This is where the students propose like a so-called festival of possibilities after realizing which site is the most suitable one to kind of create the central area in Kaluđerica, and then implement or kind of input the missing infrastructure. But again, this publication and preparation comes published soon. The final part of my presentation is to also not show you only the project, but also the teaching process. So this is something I'm coordinating at our chair. That's the mandatory urban design lecture course for students of second year of architecture studies. And it's all being taught in English. And this is it's a tool where we try to put our own work experience, and also kind of looking at also other people's work. It's a course of contemporary urban design to sort of bring all those things to our students in Switzerland. We have international students, but most students are Swiss. So we're looking at different cities, so we bring back this knowledge we find, and our colleagues find, and put it in the format of a lecture course. And you can see that's we use the format of this word that we mentioned several times, of tools. So something, how to make, it's a theoretical lecture course, but how to make it understandable and, let's say, sensible for the students, so that they just don't come in the early morning or listen to a lecture and then don't use this knowledge they hear in the design studio or later in the career. So we call this urban operative tools. So translating these case studies into tools where we really explain the process, how things happen. We just don't show final renderings of master plans and buildings and parks, but really try to teach the students kind of this behind the curtains, the process, how things develop. And this is just for the program 1 semester, because we look at from Caracas to Berlin, Paris, New York, Mumbai, etc., etc. And then what's really interesting for us to sort of find these cross connections between. So again, this knowledge transfer is easy to say, but what's really how relevant, important are things that we see in Sao Paulo, in Zurich, and vice versa. And we ask students to do a weekly exercise and submit it. So this is where they kind of train what they hear in the lecture course, how to rethink, let's say, mega scale infrastructure. That's the New York lecture, or how to, after this Berlin lecture, so we have to present this experiences from Berlin, how to reactivate or activate spaces in a temporary way, temporary use of spaces. And this is work by Raumlabor, which is a very interesting office from Berlin. And what they do, they have this project called the Kitchen Monument, where they have a inflatable kitchen. So they call it kitchen because kitchen is a meeting where people meet and talk. So they go, you can see it very well, but it's a truck, that's a balloon. So they kind of pump it up and go to kind of certain non-places where usually you wouldn't think that they are kind of potential meeting places for people. So this is under urban rail bridge in Berlin. But then we ask our students to propose similar things for Zurich. So what can be, this is a Hartbrücke, it's a very, very large bridge in Zurich. So what can be done or proposed there as a temporary measure? Looking at different scales, this is also very important for us. So where does urbanism, urban design, architecture begin, start, ends? So we look also at different scales of case studies we're teaching, the mega scale, up to the medium scale and micro scale. And of course, if there's a micro intervention in the form of this, what is its implication on wider urban context? Again, what could learning, so this is as a kind of written exam, they have to do a research paper, they have to analyze really in detail without romanticizing, but kind of argumenting, justifying what does this case study, is it kind of without copy pasting, but what could be learned from case studies in Sao Paulo and brought to Zurich or Berlin, Kiev, etc. And my last advice is 5 more slides to students. This is based on my experience as a young professional. What we very often are not being taught in schools. This is not a critique on our teachers, but this is just something I learned myself. So number one, so architects, when you read Arc Daily and Bustle and stuff, they're also just normal people. So don't idolize them. I mean, some people are fetishizing, etc., etc. So they're just normal people like you and me. That's, for example, Le Corbusier in his free time. But I don't know whether this is right, but I found interesting quotes by Plato and Aristotle. I don't know whether this is right, but if you read this, we judge the happiness of a city by reference on how well the individuals within it are doing. A city is, after all, a collection of individuals, and it exists for the sake of their happiness. I'm like, oh yeah, but I was talking about this on conference for 2 years, and this guy was already doing it 370 BC. And Aristotle as well, he's saying that the city is not a business contract or an alliance for mutual defense against wrongdoers, etc., etc. So those things really sound as they were. I know it's phenomenological, it's simple, but those things really, if you just remove this guy and put, I don't know, who, it would sound more or less the same. That's again this based on the lecture course. So where you, as a student, you do utopian things and visionary as a student, and then go to the real world, to the real market, and you realize things that don't really work like I was thinking as a student. So utopia is fine, and visionary thinking is fine, but we try to bring our students to justify arguments, to give arguments for the ideas. And I don't want to sort of a direct critique of the colleagues, but this is something, such ideas of green and vertical cities and whatever you find in portals and journals. So without kind of really criticizing this project, but how kind of green cities should be conceptualized and planned, I would say it's much more complicated than giving interesting renderings. So I don't want to read that, but just this is what we show our students to understand how to create stronger arguments. So rethink historical ideas in a critical way. That's I was giving a talk in Pavillon de l'Arsenal in Paris. It's somewhere here, and then I showed this image where this Le Corbusier's plan to transform the central part of Paris. There's 50-story skyscrapers, everyone knows that from theory course, which didn't work out, fortunately or unfortunately. People think it's a visionary utopia project, this will never happen, but this is much more realistic than you think. I think it was 2-3 years ago. But anyways, this is also 2-3 years ago. This is China. So my friends who work in China and told me about this kind of mega projects of cities somewhere in the Gobi Desert, whatever, which is cities. This is a channel like a message to the students. Cities are kind of mega cities, so kind of million people cities are being planned without the real kind of realistic idea and strategy behind what you have is. This is just the reality of those cities, empty cities. Number 4, challenge yourself with other fields of operation. For me, it was astonishing when you Google around and you look at companies and IBM and whatever, Schneider and Audi and BMW. So everyone now, as I said at the beginning, is interested in cities, and this cities are becoming the problems and the solutions. So the old professions are now dealing with city planning architecture. And when you go to most of those companies and also large political organizations, I went one to the United Nations in Geneva, Genf, Switzerland, and they talked about smart cities and urban transformation. And I was astonished. I just went there to this half day conference that I was the only architect there. So there was all kind of other people, economists, journalists, which they must participate in this planning and visual process in cities, but I would say that you should kind of rethink your position as working someone in a small design office, which is fair enough, but also how to kind of work with all those big companies and kind of stakeholders who are really participating as well. And this is also, I found it in an architecture portal. This is a number which is should be shown to every architecture student. This is a number of architects per capita. I think most of you know it. How many architects exist there per capita? In USA there are 422,000 architects, and I was astonished to see that there are 147,000 architects only in Italy. So, and looking at Macedonia, where we were, telling things to students, we realized that they have one architect per 687 people. So, is there enough work for all of us? Sure, but we have to kind of rethink maybe also the position of our profession. And again, this is my compliment to the organizers of this and the whole team and the whole platform to build around it to support your local initiatives. It's going to go into summer schools to Holland and Switzerland, but also, and I had, and some of my friends who also started bottom up, they tell always about how it's easy, how is it hard actually to find people to work with you, to be kind of visionaries, to kind of don't sleep. You guys always do a great job. You're tired. So how is it really how to involve more people to kind of support locally? This is what we do in ex-Yugoslavia. We have different kind of events in every city. It's an informal group of people where we also try to support different our colleagues in Skopje, Pristina, Sarajevo, etc., etc. So to close my presentation, don't look at kind of final products, final images. That's the Meyer Lion. Everyone knows it, I hope. But how to sort of look behind the curtains, demystify the whole process, and kind of understand it. So let's look at that. Thank you very much.